Hey, Pastor. Hey, board member. Glad to have you back in this episode inside the module, What's a Board Supposed to Do? You know, this is kind of a big topic. We're going to cover the 7 essential purposes of a church board. So we're going to do it in 2 parts. And this first part, we're going to cover the first 3 essential purposes. But want to do a little review. You know, in the last episode, we gave you the 30,000-foot view of what a church board is supposed to do. You remember we drew the line on the whiteboard. We had 4 things above the line. The board's responsible for worldview, for mission, for core values, and for goals and aims. And then below the line is in the purview of the staff or the key ministry leaders, and that's strategy. And as long as the board is running in their lanes and the staff is running in their lanes, good things happen at church. It's when, and by the way, the lanes need to be informed of each other. So the staff informs the board of strategy. The board informs the staff of, the staff informs the board of strategy. The board informs the staff of worldview, mission, core values, and goals. And then, of course, the pastor is in both worlds all the time. So if you need a review, just pop back to that episode. Now, to jump off from that episode to this one and the next one, we are going to talk about the 7 essential purposes of a board. So again, we're doing it in 2 parts. But before we get into those parts, I want to talk a little bit about the lack of understanding on these essential purposes that lots of church boards and pastors have. Sometimes boards and pastors will feel like they're the protector of the church. They're going to protect the church from the pastor. So it's kind of like, hey, we were here long before the pastor got here, and we're going to be here long after they get here. They leave, and so therefore we're going to protect the church from the pastor. Sometimes they can errantly view that they're the representatives of the people. They will think in terms of human government. In lots of us are in democracies. In the United States form of government, we have 3 branches. We have the judicial, the executive, and the legislative. Sometimes boards can think, well, okay, in church government must be like U.S. government or some sort of democracy. So the executive must be like the pastor. The legislative must be like the board members because we must represent the people. And then, you know, if you have a denominational leadership or some church fellowship you're part of, they're the judicial to make sure that the church doesn't go off the rails doctrinally or so on. So that must be the way it works. So they're kind of in the democracy mindset when in reality they need to be in the theocracy mindset. So those are some errant views that sometimes we bring to the table when we're thinking about the purposes of a board. And so I want to just have a shift our thinking in this way and not think the way I just talked about. But let's drill into the real essential purposes of a church board. The very first essential purpose of the church board is spiritual support. This is what a board does in supporting the pastor, supporting the board, fellow board members, and supporting the church. This is of unbelievably high value, some of the highest value and essential purpose any board is going to do. Undergirding the pastor, undergirding the board, undergirding the church in the spiritual sense, you just can't put a price tag on that. You know, sometimes when you think of board work, you think of the corporate value, you think of certainly there's the fiduciary responsibility, which we're ultimately going to talk about in this series. You think about the governance component. You think about, you know, you got budgets, bylaws, buildings, people. So you got all those. You have all those things. But the reality is, the spiritual support that a board provides to the pastor of the church and the board itself is of the highest value. You have 3 board members. You have 3 primary prayer responsibilities to the church. Number 1 is to pray for the church. And I suggest that you be able to pray, you be able to slice off 10 minutes a day to pray for the church, to pray for the pastor, and to pray for each other. Now, frequently board members will pray for the church, they'll pray for the pastor, but they don't as frequently pray for each other. And I'm going to suggest that you really need to be able to pray for all 3. When you do, you're providing the highest value in spiritual support to the church. In this spiritual support, you want to be able to provide counsel. Counsel generally to the pastor, but counsel to other board members. Advising is some of the highest value any board member can have. And sometimes board members will think of that as, in other words, I'm just the rubber stamp for the pastor. No. No, you are in a high value advising role, providing spiritual counsel to the pastor, and that is of great value. Walk with the pastor, spiritually and otherwise. Intercede on the pastor's behalf, on the board's behalf, on the church's behalf. When you get on the board, you want to deepen your own personal walk with God, and you do that by giving spiritually and receiving spiritually. A board position is not a power position. It's a deeply spiritual servant position. Number one, primary, or the first primary essential purpose of a church board is spiritual support. The second essential purpose of a church board is missional fulfillment. This is of extremely high value. After the spiritual support, it's critically important that church boards and church board members understand their role and responsibility to protect the mission of the church. You'll remember we talked in the previous episode about the four things above the line in responsibility of the board. So we talked about worldview, mission, core values, and goals. And then below the line, we talked about strategy, which was in the purview of the staff. But the board has this responsibility above the line. And mission is intimately they're all intertwined with worldview, mission, core values, and goals. Mission is of the highest directional value for the church. Board member, you can sit there and sometimes think, I just sit here, I don't really do anything. No. The board has unbelievably high calling in advising and serving and protecting mission. Now, staff has high calling in strategy development to fulfill mission, but it's absolutely critical that the board pays attention to mission. You have seen it, I've seen it. Churches that back in the day were doing great things for the Lord, but over time they began to drift. Their mission drifted, and today they're not doing anything at all. Why? Because somebody was not paying attention to mission. Pastors and board members together, collectively as the board, protect mission. It's an essential purpose of the church board. So we have number one, spiritual support. Number two, we have missional fulfillment. And number three, essential purpose of the board is policy guidance. Now, this one doesn't sound very spiritual. I get it. But the board and the church need to have policy that guides, that creates a track for the church to move forward on. The policies need to be broad, they need to be flexible, and they need to provide guidance. Now, policies are critically important for these reasons. Policies set direction, policies define a course of action, and policies are prudent and wise. Correct policies are preparatory, not reactionary. And by the way, in terms of a policy manual, generally, for the church to be able to be flexible and move forward quickly, you want your policy manual to be very small. Churches with big, thick policy manuals don't grow because they policy themselves out of the ability to move forward and grow as the Lord would want them to. So just be wise, be prudent in that way, and set your policies to really set the stage for the Lord to do great things. So, what's the takeaway from all this that we've talked about with these three essential purposes? We've talked about spiritual support, we've talked about missional fulfillment, and we've talked about policy guidance. These three are all critically important, setting the stage for what a board is supposed to do. Now, we're going to talk about the next four purposes here in the next episode, and I want to encourage you as a board to talk about these. So, we've set the stage for conversation. Talk about these three: the spiritual support, the missional fulfillment, and the policy guidance. But talk about them. And then we're going to talk about the next four here in the next episode. Talk about them at the board table. Ask each other, where do they contribute to the greatest extent on these essential purposes? And where is it more difficult for individual board members to contribute? Pastor, let me encourage you. You need to lead this dialogue. Board member, I encourage you to engage with the pastor and your fellow board members in this entire conversation. So there you have it. The first 3 essential purposes of a church board. I look forward to the next episode where we cover the next 4. And by the time we're all done, we've got the 7 essential purposes for a church board. It's going to be a great ride, friend. Thanks for hanging out with me on this video. Look forward to seeing you in the next one. Be blessed.